Hi, I'm Nelson Ford from the Gunsmith in Phoenix, Arizona. And these are my favorite. I just love to do questions and answers. And so Jason asks something about 1911's, and he says people drag the Colts, and I never heard the drag thing. My son had to explain that to me. I'm not even going to use my experience on this one. I'm going to lend this to my friend Chuck Rogers. He's probably the most qualified man in the world to answer this question. And he knows the difference between Colts and other guns. He knows that the hammers are correct, sear springs are the best in the business, sears, disconnects are always 1305 in height. You want me to talk? I don't want to talk. But you can buy Springfields and other 1911s, non-Colts, and the breech faces on the Colts are 485. Bingo on every one of them. And then you get a Springfield and it's at 510. It's wherever, God knows where it's going to be. Every Colt you take, you just take the slide off. Because I do this, I do a physical. I'm a little freak when it comes to dial indicators, dial calipers. And I mic everything. I'm a mic freak. And on revolvers, I always put the headspace and gap and the weight of the hammer. Everything gets recorded when a gun comes in and when it goes out. And on the 1911s, I do the same thing. And the only guns that are consistent and correct are Colts. This hurts to say because I ride a Harley, and it broke my heart to see a silver SS 396 um, Chevy Camaro go through my parking lot, convertible today, black interior. I am an American. I like American stuff. But the Tisas, they copy the Colt to the T. They understand the sear, how the sear is shaped. Take a Colt, look at their sear, and take a sear from any other gun out there in America. And Colt's got the only one like that, except for Tisas. They copied it perfectly. The Colt sear spring, they temper it. They make it the same way. They're correct. If you look at it, I hate saying different manufacturers because it's not right. Myself in trouble. But if you look at sear springs from different manufacturers of 1911s, they were made in a hut in Bolivia. They're they actually take the spring and they cut. They cut with some sort of a saw cutter or a cutoff wheel, and their hook at the bottom is supposed to be at 90 degrees. And they're whatever, they're at some silly angle. On a Colt, they're exactly at 90 degrees every time. And they're shaped right and they're colored right. And if somebody doesn't like the way the Colts are, that's great. It'll leave more for the rest of us to use. But you're not gonna convince me. 45 years on the bench, you're not going to tell me what the difference is between these guns, especially a mic freak, because those parts are supposed to be at certain uh, they're supposed to be at certain tolerances, and if they're not, then they're not right. A genuine question: while my 1911 is on half cock and I slightly pull the trigger, the hammer falls. Sometimes it doesn't. What would cause that? Oh, on a Series 80, the what would you would call the half cock notch, which is not really a half cock notch. It's just a shelf, and it pulls off. You have the Series 80 mechanism making the gun safe. On a Series 70, it would have a half cock notch further back, and it wouldn't pull off that. So you're talking about a new Series 80 Colt, and they'll pull right off the half cock notch because they do have the Series 80 mechanism in them, and they don't need that half cock notch. After your advice on Smith Magnum revolvers and H110 powder, the forcing cone burner, I swapped to accurate number 9. I make the correct choice. I don't know accurate powders. I use almost exclusively bullseye in my life right now for my pistol calibers. I know it's hard to find, but I always overbuy, so I have enough for 5 or 10 years all the time. During the COVID thing, I didn't experience any shortage of anything because I don't buy what I'm going to eat the next day. I buy what I'm going to eat the next month. So take that advice. Stay ahead of the game. But I wish I could help you with accurate powders. I never loaded with them. Sorry. What's the best book you would recommend on S&W revolver history with all the models made? Thanks for the great content, Robert. Um, there's a book called the Catalog, Smith and Wesson Catalog. I don't know what number they're on now, but any of them are great. They're great stuff, and all books are good. But the Smith and Wesson catalogs, I think it's Supika and someone else. Great book. Get yourself some. I have a 1897 and 16 gauge. I have never shot it, but very cool. Oddly, it has a 5 serial number instead of a 6 number. Could it be pre-1900? All you have to do is get online and you can find serial number references, and they'll be able to help you. I don't know. I don't have any of that stuff in front of me right now, but I know the 16 gauge wasn't made until the second year, which would have been 1899, which would only give it 1 year before 1900. And so, yeah, that's a I can almost answer that. An 1897 and 16 gauge would have been made in 1899 or later. So there's only 1 year that it could fall into. I would reference the Winchester information for that. Can you do a video on shotgun release triggers? I know some guys that use them and they really like them. In fact, there's a guy about to move back to Phoenix in January. Maybe we'll get him in here to talk about them. Maybe he'll bring one. But I know he uses release triggers. I just don't go that direction. My mind is never that far from the original operation of a gun. But he's one of the founders of IPSC, and I'd love to have him on my video. We were supposed to have a guy talk about the 4, not armors, but 4 guys that made grips in LAPD. Hurst and what's the other guy? Fuzzy Farron, Hope, and Hogue, and somebody else. I'm going to get Matt in here, and we're going to put 2 people in here, and we're going to talk about the LAPD armors and what they did. But that's the only thing I know as far as that. Thanks for answering my question, Mr. Ford. It's absolute joy. After I installed a TK custom extended firing pin, the problem with light primer strikes has improved. That's good. However, I still can't reliably ignite ammo with harder primers such as Armscore or Friochi Range Dynamics. Good. Because you're going to have to really dial your gun up for those. My factor drain screw, you mean strain screw, feels like it's screwed in all the way. But see, the strain screw is a waste of time. You need to bend the spring to achieve the weight you want, and you need to be able to calibrate the weight you have so that you know where you need to go. It's like an old topic with me, but I love going over because a lot of guys don't know. A lot of guys are just getting in our channel and they're only seeing the new stuff, but we've covered this stuff lots of times. In fact, I've held up charts with all the different weights that you need to use for the different size primers and different size frames and different type ignition systems. And so K-frame, part 1 and part 2, tune-ups, there's information in there on those. If you don't have an old RCBS box and rod to calibrate your Smith & Wesson revolver hammer, get one. They're on eBay. They're cheap. And you can use that to calibrate your hammer. Also, you want 10 thousandths behind your cartridge and in front of your recoil shield as a minimum or maximum, so that you have proper ignition. Those firing pins, they come at around 491, 492, and I found that the newest ones I've been getting from Cylinder and Slide, I don't know who makes them for them or if they make them, but they're at 510, 511. I just had one at 512. I put it in a gun today, and it's not just that. A guy had a long firing pin in his gun, and he wanted me to use it. I replaced it because it was close to that length, 510, but the journal in the middle that allows it to travel, with the pin holding it in place, didn't the front of it wasn't cut all the way up there. The journal wasn't cut as far, and it didn't allow the firing pin to present itself so much to the hammer strike. In other words, there wasn't enough of the firing pin sticking out the rear for the hammer to really smack it. And so I know the Cylinder and Slides are good, but if you're just turning in the screw, turning it out, there's no juice there. There's no intelligence there. You got to calibrate it. You got to know what you have. You have to have a place you have to go. And if most of the Smith and Wessons, if they have the firing pin on the hammer, they'll light them up at 42 or greater. On the new guns with the firing pin in the wall and not on the hammer. Man, I had one come in today. Well, it came in a month ago or so. I got to it today. I calibrated it. Was at 56 ounces. I didn't change it. I left it there. 52 would be lucky on those. And they're going to be all a little different because the holes are all drilled in different places on all of them. Don't think they're all the same. Some of them will operate at 52. Most of them will operate between 56 and 60. Some of them you got to bump them up to 62, 64, and then they start lighting up Fiocchis and other primers. Arms Corps, I don't know what to tell you about those. I don't know that ammo. But I do know that when I joined Cactus Combat League in 1980, and we had Winchester, Remington, or Federal ammunition. That's all we had. We didn't have computers. We didn't have stuff shipped in from everywhere. We had American-made ammo. I know guys like Stevie Bresson that used to run his gun at 30 ounces and break all the primers. And then I would hand seat on the way to matches, Federal pistol primers, low seat them. And I was running 36, 38, and they were breaking. But on customer guns, on the old ignition system, I like 42. On the new ignition system, I've talked about one of my customers, Private Eye, Guy White, used to have a radio show in town. He bought a new Smith 66 to replace his old one, brought it to me. He had ignition problems. We put in a long firing pin. He had brought it back. Still he had ignition problems. We bumped him to 64. Then we bumped him to 68, and he still had ignition problems. And so I love Smith and Wesson, but I'm not sure the new ignition systems are up to snuff. Anyway, I hope I covered that. But I'm sure I'll be covering it again. Here's a big paragraph, but I got an arrow to go right to. My question is this. I recently saw someone create a short ramp where the slide strikes the disconnect. And know that I can do that after measuring the height of the disconnect from the frame and provide a smooth depression of the disconnect rather than the strike slide does. I know it will make racking smoother and possibly action, but is it advisable or worth the trouble? In an engineering sense, I like it, but nobody knows everything, and I take time and experience over. Take a chance. I was lucky enough to work on a 1913, I think, serial number NO121XX that a customer brought in, still at the store. This gun is 110 years old and has all original parts except for the barrel and the grips. And I didn't notice any problem with the disconnect or anything I had to do with the disconnect. I mic'd it when it was there. I always mic the hammer hooks, the disconnect height, and make sure the sear fits over in the Tommy Wilson jig so it's righteous. and I always do the breech face like that. But it was still in spec, and it's 110 years old, and I don't know what you're going to achieve by changing anything underneath the slide. I know I have somebody the other day was telling me they were bringing something up to 1,000 or 1,400 grit paper, and I just thought nothing needs to be that highly polished on a gun. It's a gun. It's not quite a tire on a car, but it's a gun. And as long as it works smooth and feels good, there's no reason to get extreme on it. I'm not sure exactly how to answer this question, um, but I've never had to do anything to the underside of a slide to make a disconnect work better. They are a telltale, though, when you have a little travel in your trigger pull and your hammer hooks are at 20 and you've got a 30% relief on your sear and everything's glossed and you still have a little bit of movement. Take your slide off and just work your trigger without dropping the hammer, and you'll see that disconnect moving in that hole. And I make 2 marks in the front, 2 marks in the back, and sometimes you have to watch where that disconnect is so things are right when you're making those marks, because you don't want to move it all the way to the back and then there's no pre-travel. Move it all the way to the front and it can be the opposite. And so you move that disconnect, you move that hole down a little bit so that disconnect can't move. And the reason I do that is because that curved surface underneath the slide in the front of it where the disconnect rides, it'll leave a little mark on the slide where it wears away the bluing. And that's what you're feeling when you take up that trigger, that disconnect's moving in there. Poke little holes on either side of that hole and move it together, and it gets rid of your movement. So that's the best I can do on that. We have a dinner date. I enjoy doing these, but I think we have to go. And please send some more questions and comments. Thanks for watching.